Hello and welcome to Reboot 2021. I'm Rebecca Campbell from Zambezi. I'm going to be hosting this event. Before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge the Gadigal people, the traditional owners of the land in which much of us are meeting on today. And because we're online and people are all over the place, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which we're all meeting on today and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are participating in this event. So today is a special event, slightly different to the events that we ran last year. We have Dr. Kathryn Ritchie, who is one of the world's most sought after management consultants. But before I introduce Kathryn, we have got a 2021 message from our Lord Mayor, Clover Moore.
Thank you, Rebecca, and hello everyone. Welcome to our Reboot seminars for 2021. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of our land, part of the oldest living culture on earth, and I pay my respects to their elders. I also acknowledge the people of the many nations who live in our city. And I'd also like to welcome the many local experts participating in the Reboot series and sharing their knowledge with our small businesses and startup community. Last year, at the height of the pandemic, the city surveyed our business community to learn what you need to survive and to recover from the damage brought about by COVID. In response to what you told us, we launched the Reboots webinars to equip you with the skills and strategies that will help you thrive in these challenging times. The first series was delivered between October and November last year, with more than 2,800 businesses registered. And I am sure that you will benefit equally from this new series. So thank you for your interest in attending today. And I'll leave you with Rebecca and our local experts to advise you on how to strategize and plan for growth in this ever-changing economic environment.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. So if any of you are new to Reboot, what we're going to do is share and chat a link to the sessions that we had last year. We ran 6 sessions focused on digital marketing, growth and personal branding content, some amazing sessions. So please check out the videos. This year, we have 6 sessions in a row every Monday at this time for the next 6 weeks. Then we'll take a break for a month, and then we've got our final 6 weeks starting in May. So this session that we've got coming up is looking at strategy, operating for growth, finance, leadership. We'll be running them over the next 6 weeks. Next week, we have Ben Thompson, who is the founder and CEO of Employment Hero. His business, Employment Hero, has grown 100% every year for the past 5 years, and he's going to be running a session called Operating for Growth. So if you would like to go to that session, please register. We did find out last year that Zoom has a capacity, and we've reached that capacity several times. So please do register for the events ahead of time. Another one of the ones that are coming up is Steve Vamos, who is the CEO of Xero, who is going to be talking about how to CEO in 2021. So please register for that event as well. I'm sure that one will fill up. So now I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Kathryn Ritchie. So Dr. Kathryn Ritchie is founder and CEO of Ignition Institute, an international strategy execution consulting firm based in New York. Kathryn is originally from Australia and is actually in the Gold Coast right now. So Kathryn has advised several companies who you will know as household names, and her special expertise is in supporting businesses to develop great strategy to fulfill on the founder's goals and then to operationalize that strategy. So today's session is going to run in 2 halves. We're going to do the first half with Kathryn, where we'll talk about how to develop a great strategy for your business. She'll give you a framework. We are going to share a link to the slides in the chat. We're just having a couple of issues with the slide with the link, but we will work it out and share that link during the session. So you don't need to take down notes. We'll also share some notes after this session. So after the halfway point, which is about developing your strategy, we'll have questions. And then there will be the next half, which will be around how to operationalize your strategy with your team. So how to make an annual plan actually happen. We're going to take questions at the end of the first half and then at the end of the second half. So I'm now super excited. I've worked with Kathryn before myself, and I know that her content is incredible. She's the author of several best-selling books for her content on how to develop a killer strategy. Thank you, Kathryn.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Good morning, everyone, and it's an absolute delight to be here. Thank you also to Lord Mayor, and I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners. I'm on the Gold Coast at the moment, and the Ugambe people are the traditional owners here, and equally as Rebecca did, to acknowledge all the traditional owners of the spaces we're in. As Rebecca mentioned, I'm normally based in the US. I flip between the two countries, which of course is not happening in any shape or form now. And let me just give you a very brief overview of how we're going to approach today, what I want to cover. And even though this is about building an annual plan, therein lies the challenge. You can't just dive in to building an annual plan. It actually is premised on the backdrop of really strong thinking around your strategy and overarching positioning of your business. So we're going to look at how to create a winning strategy, and then equally we're going to look at how you start to ground that into a plan. And those are the first two really important chunks of working towards an annual plan. Off the back of today, and with the use of some of the slides that I'll provide, that Rebecca will create a link for, that should give you the bones, and don't hesitate to ask sort of what comes next. And when we talk about building a plan, we're not talking about copious amounts of pages. We work with businesses of all shapes and sizes, right from single-person startup right through to organisations with hundreds and thousands of people. If I have to talk about what I'm really passionate about, it's working in the startup space right through to sort of mid-market. And yep, I still enjoy going into large corporates. You always learn something, but it's very much fun in these spaces. In one shape, form or another, I've always been fascinated by what unleashes potential in businesses. And that's either having been a leader in the health, finance or investment banking sector and in consulting, and most particularly with the leaders that we work with. And so that's what we've drawn on. And you'll see behind me on the side the three concentric circles, which are equally in your slides. And through the work that we've done in looking at strategy development, strategy execution and transformation, and quite frankly, anything, we use this as our diagnostic footprint, because these things are always at play. No matter what level of conversation, what the topic is, you always need enough clarity, enough cohesion, and then enough disciplines to move things forward. We very deliberately use the word enough, because you overinvest if you go to the nth degree. And particularly when we're in smaller enterprises, we've really got to be careful about where we deploy resources to get the return on investment that we need. So we start with enough, and the nexus of all three is really where firepower is absolutely unleashed. Today, we're going to be much more focused on the clarity and then translating it into the discipline of planning. If you don't get that first, then this will be a waste of time. And so that's why I say it's not quite as simple as just pulling out the template and starting to do an annual plan. In terms of the chunks of execution, we've broken those down, and you'll see them in the pound deck as well. First, you've got to create the winning strategy. And we mean one with competitive edge, with teeth, not just showing up on the field and having a go. And then the second piece is actually taking, and you'll see when we get into looking at what a winning strategy is, that there's quite a lot of conceptual elements in that. And that needs to be translated into what we call the middle ground. And so the next phase of going to execution mode is grounding your strategy. And there are three key chunks here. One is, in fact, the building the middle ground of the plan. And if I was to say one of the greatest challenges for organisations is actually doing that. It's relatively easy to get your conceptual stuff. And then the tendency is to go to micro, to go to the tactical action. And the symptoms of doing that are we're overwhelmed, we can't prioritise, we've got too much on. As soon as we hear that, we know that there actually isn't enough clarity, and it certainly hasn't been translated into that middle ground, because that's the arena that'll allow you to make trade-off decisions, which are inevitable when you set about building a plan. And so that the second phase of grounding starts with translating into middle ground. The second piece of this is actually engaging your organisation, and not in a great series of cascading comms. It's far more powerful to do that in a thoughtful way where they can internalise, co-create and play. You need to get enough done at your winning strategy, and then in the translation phase, great opportunities to engage the rest of your organisation. And then the final chunk of this grounding your strategy is to recognise that everything you do in your organisation is played out through the culture. And it either works with you or it works against you. So best to really do it deliberately in the knowledge of what you want to shape, because in fact we shape our culture in our organisations every minute of every day. It's every choice and every action and every decision that we do, every initiative that we unleash. And then the final piece is bringing that to life through the organisation. And in a way, your annual plan fits there. And it's really like an iceberg, again, which you'll see in the PowerPoint deck, is the top bit, creating the winning strategy, is the relatively easy bit, and it takes less time. The next two pieces take a lot more. And the bringing to life of that plan is going to be so much easier if you do this middle ground piece well. And so we'll be talking about that a little later. In a moment, I'm going to go through, I'm going to share my screen and go through how we create a winning strategy. And I'd just like to acknowledge and thank our colleagues online, 3 business leaders who gave of their time a week or so ago. That's Donnie Wilkinson, who's the MD of Equitise, Stephen Patterson, who is the owner and CEO of Derivan, and Marianne Harris from TACON, who leads that organisation in partnership with her husband. And what we did there was gave them a sense of what it's like to think through your strategy, and to understand how clear it is. And so the questions that I've shared with you, you can do that on your own. I'd suggest you actually talk it out aloud. And that might sound strange, but when you actually hear yourself talk, it gives you another feedback mode, another sensory mode to work with, and helps you iterate. Ideally, though, you would work with a business partner or a respected advisor that you value, maybe another colleague that you buddy up who runs another business. And going through those questions in the first instance, broadly in that order, will really let you know how clear you are in terms of that winning strategy and how ready you are, in fact, to go into the next phase of developing your plan. And it needn't take long. I mean, we had about 90-minute discussions and we got the bones of all of those winning strategies. They're all at different stages, so some are more mature and more developed than others. There's no right or wrong. It's just where you are and where you start. So if I'm just going to share my screen now in respect of the winning strategy, just one moment. So this is a roll. I'll be scrolling through this. But basically start in your own business. And that is, what's behind your business? Why does it exist? What's the reason for being, if you like? And this is really our mission and our core purpose. And I find this one of the most fascinating conversations to have with founders and business owners is where did that come from? What was that driving force? What was the need or the passionate pursuit that started you off? And then what's that longer term impact, your long-term vision? Now, those two things, ultimately you want them in a nice tight statement, but get the essence out. Don't worry about being perfect, and then build on them, because you often need to sit with them for a time and tighten them. But once they are grounded, these don't change all the time. Now, you certainly need to check in on them. And the reality is that in this day and age, we certainly learned last year how the world could be turned upside down in a moment. Even though we knew that a pandemic could happen, we had not really internalised what that would look like and how we would go. So you do have to check in, hence the importance of looking at your environment. And I can't stress how important constantly checking. And when we get to the second phase of this the session today, the second content phase, there's a little form or a little sheet with a series of questions there that I'd be doing that with your teams, with yourself, probably every 3 months at the moment, because things are pretty volatile. And this is looking at what's going on politically, economically, what are the social shifts underway, technological, competitive, regulatory, and so forth. And I think what I've learned in the past year is that sometimes you can have an explosive period of this. And so certainly coming out of Harvard, MIT, they're suggesting because of COVID, technology and the digitisation of businesses was accelerated by probably 5 years last year and likely to be accelerated again by 5 years. So every business needs to take this seriously. Anyone sitting on the fence needs to get off the fence and go, what does this mean for us? How might we be disrupted, or how might we disrupt? And so technology just can't be ignored. I think something else as well, and it was almost happened at the same time, because I think COVID exploded what we aren't doing well, and that's things around equity. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion took a really strong profile, as did Black Lives Matter, as did the climate and sustainability. And so organisations in this day and age need to take a stand. You're going to fall behind unless you know where you stand and know why you stand for the things that you stand for, so that you can actually attract the right people. There isn't a fence-sitting option any longer. And so really think about this external environment. It can really throw up great opportunities. The next thing to do is just take a moment and go, where's the business right now? How are we performing? What's morale? What's working? What isn't? And so forth. And that just puts you in the here and now, inside the broader environment. And then think about what your winning ambition might be. And that's a more tangible goal. You might say it's our 5-year vision or our 3-year vision. Just for ease of language, so we haven't got visions all over the place, we use the word winning ambition. And then the next thing to go to is a SWOT. Now, interestingly, we often see that a SWOT somehow ends up as an end in and of itself. It's actually not. It's a means to an end. It's a mechanism to allow you to really think through, what do you do really well? How can you package up the things that you're outstanding or building strong capabilities in, and how then can you apply those to the best opportunities that fit the strengths that you have. And so a SWOT is very powerful. It equally throws up things that can hold you back. So the things internally that your weaker aspects, and equally the external environment. And this is important because when you build your plan, you want to pick out the things that you need to address so that you can minimise the risks during your FY21 plan. So don't leave them off to the side in a risk assessment. Think, how are we going to mitigate, and build the mitigation back into the plan. Now we're in a position to really start thinking about the winning strategy. And this, some of this is taken from Roger Martin and the work he did in really thinking through the playing to win theory, method, and he and Lafley did that in their work at Procter & Gamble. And Roger Martin worked very closely with the likes of Michael Porter and so forth. But basically this question, where to play, is quite simply, what geography? What's our brand footprint? Product and offer, product and services at least. The verticals you might focus in on, the segments and personas, the channels. So play those out, and then you move into really the gritty bit. And this is effectively, you need to think of this in light of those how to wins and go, in those segments or in those geographies, what are the opportunities that we can really apply our strengths to, so that we can then have something that's unique, that differentiates our offer and service. And I'd just like to acknowledge Stephen, whose father founded Derivan in the 50s. And they saw a gap in the market. There were school art materials were not being provided appropriately. There were only unsafe housing and construction materials. So they saw that opportunity, and right from the get-go, they were thrown into a position of innovation, of R&D and innovation to provide safe materials. Now they've gone well beyond the school environment now, and today are very much known as innovators, people who do the research and development. So they produce the new colours. They look at how to use different materials to create different effects. And this is a how-to-win strategy. It's using their deep innovation expertise and R&D know-how, and then their sense and experience of looking into the external environment of emerging needs, unmet needs, and really applying that. So I'm not sharing anything that's competitively sensitive here, because you can just see that from reading the history of the organisation. And so that's one how to win. It's really continue to deploy our strength in R&D and innovation to maintain that leadership role. And ditto, that over time, that builds a reputation. So they're known for that amongst the conservators and the artists and others in that community around the world. So they will work with Stephen and his team to think of new ways. So now you've got, again, another how to win, where you're actually build a reputation and credibility. So you can continue to be a thought leader as a result of that. So that's how these things come into play. Some of them you're creating, and some of them you're adding to, and some are part of your heritage. You don't want to have a great shopping list here, because this actually is the bones of the architecture of your plan. Our organisation should be around sort of maybe 3 to 6 maximum. Sometimes larger organisations have more, but these are the things that are going to drive differentiation, your competitive advantage. So very, very important. And then the next obvious question is, if we're going to maintain those points of differentiation, then what are the capabilities? What are the things that we have to be absolutely outstanding at? You're only going to have a couple of these, maybe 3, 2 or 3, that you want to protect and build, because they are going to continue to underpin your ability to win in the marketplace. Something we like to do at about this stage is then play. This is a necessarily imperfect exercise. Let's think out 3, 5 years and quite simply go, what's the world going to look like? And then come back. So that's a series of milestones in 3 or 5 years, mostly N3 is best, and then come back to N1 year. And now you're getting into the things that are going to help you build your plan. Then you've got your KPIs. How are we going to measure? What's going to be most sensitive over time to track the trends? Come back to those weaknesses and areas of priority that you need to focus in on. Again, this will inform your plan. And think through the role of culture. Very crucial. So that's the flow. That's a lot of information, but it's actually a logical flow. Now I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to hand across to Johnny, Stephen and Marianne to give a couple of minutes on, firstly, just who they are and where their business is up to, and then where they're up to in their strategy and what they hope to get out. What stage are they up to? So I might hand across to Johnny first, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathryn. Hi, everyone. My name is Johnny Wilkinson. I'm the co-founder and managing director of Optimise. So Optimise is a leading investment platform for unlisted companies in Australia and New Zealand. We started with a mission to make early stage capital markets more efficient. So we make the process of raising capital as easy as possible for startups and high growth businesses, while allowing everyday investors the ability to invest in the companies they're passionate about. So we've raised over $50 million for more than 90 companies and are continuing to grow. We've been operating for 6 years. We have a very good sense of what our market is. We're just looking at scaling the business and working out where exactly we might be expanding in product lines or geographically. So this process, and going through the process with Kathryn, or any time when you get a chance to look at your strategy and assessing your plans is always really important. And even though it can be very hard to focus or find the time as a startup founder when you feel as though you're just busy working on the day-to-day and breaking rocks and grinding away. But the ability to sort of take the time out, focus, and interact with someone who can help you provide sort of an impartial perspective and guide you through the process was invaluable, and I would encourage everyone to do it.
Thanks very much, Johnny. I might now hand to Marianne and share your experience and where you're up to with Tap On.
Thanks, Kathryn. My name's Marianne. I'm one of the co-founders of Tap On. We're an online platform connecting individuals with aged care and disability-related support needs with support professionals and small businesses. I co-founded Tap On with my husband Daniel after his spinal cord injury and our first-hand experience in trying to navigate the complexity of government-regulated spaces. And our mission at Tap On is to make healthcare accessible. So we've been operating for 3 years now. Our 2021 challenge is to scale our business and our team as we grow our geographic footprint across Australia. So visiting and creating a winning strategy for us was important, particularly as we're launching our neuro-controlled exoskeleton business, RoboFit. So the purpose for us was to get alignment for us and our team across both RoboFit and Tap On, and looking at how we plan to win and serve our customers on one business that's scaling and another that is starting out. And they both have very similar missions in the customer that they're serving in that space. So a lot of what we wanted to achieve in the strategy session, importance of it was to capture what is known to myself and Daniel and kind of is in our DNA, but to be able to ground it and share it with our team. And we have a lot of passionate people that enjoy us, but we didn't want a strategy to be dependent on us and our decision-making and become a bottleneck in our business. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Marianne. And now to Stephen, please.
Thanks, Kathryn. Yes, I'm Stephen Patterson, the CEO and co-owner and head colourman at Deravan. Deravan's Australia's oldest artist paint manufacturer, as I think Kathryn mentioned. And as market leaders, our products are used widely throughout schools, which is where we started, but also now tertiary institutions and by practicing artists all over Australia and in fact all over the world. Our vision is to make available to artists worldwide a premium paint while remaining environmentally and socially responsible. And this isn't just something we developed for the website or for a meeting, but it's actually lived every day within the business. And that's been witnessed by us attaining compliance certification in the US through ACMI, multiple awards for sustainability and employment, many world first product ranges, a 20-year involvement with the Achieve Foundation employing differently abled staff. We put 120 solar panels on the roof over 5 years ago. And the list goes on for pretty well the entire more than 50 years of the life of the business. As far as strategy goes, for nearly 2 decades, we've been strategy and planning have been a vital part of making sure we stick to our vision and our plan. We've been involving key staff in strategy planning meetings and what we call love-ins, which are a 3-day, we go away and have really frank, open discussions in these gatherings. And each time we're able to just check where we are in the overall landscape, a little bit like popping up with a periscope in a submarine, check where we are with our vision and our core values to make sure we're still on track there, and check where we are with the strategic goals and then work out new ones as we're moving forward. So yeah, that's strategy for us.
So the next session is about, okay, you've defined your plan. Now, how do you operationalize it and make sure that it works? And we'll come back to Kathryn now. Then we'll come back to the case study businesses from the City of Sydney to hear how they went with their planning session, and we'll throw to questions. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Rebecca. One of the things that I've had sort of a bit of a giggle about and also an inward look to myself is very often entrepreneurs go, look, we're actually doing really well. Why, in fact, do we need to do a plan? Why would we bother? And I had quite a debate with a colleague or a friend actually in Boston who had run a very, very successful business. And he was an older gentleman. And he said, look, we've never written anything down. We actually don't need it. And they were multi-$100 million businesses, so very successful. And I said, you're the walking strategy book. He was very charismatic and knew every piece and part of that organisation, and he just imbued it through the organisation. And I said, while you're walking around, you are the book. You're right, you probably don't need to write it down. But what will happen is when you're no longer associated with your business, you're not going to have the depth, because many of the people who work very closely with you at the beginning are not going to, they're also going to be leaving around about the same time as you. Anyway, it was interesting to see when I looked back, that he didn't write the plan down, and they actually took a huge dip as there was a transition. Now, he did have a son, and there was a transition, and they've started to build it back up again. So I would urge you to take that deliberate step to document something. As you'll see in through the link, it doesn't need to be lengthy. Get clear about that winning strategy. And why it's really important, I think, for even tiny businesses to do this work is it just forces you to be more deliberate. And you start to see things that you may not have seen in such clear form when you step outside. Because as Stephen said, he'd been going away every year for 3 days. Stepping outside and looking at your business through a window is a really important step. And when you become more deliberate, you equally have the opportunity to engage others in the conversation, and they can co-create and add to it. And then, moreover, you'll be likely to make faster decisions and clearer decisions, so you're likely to accelerate your path as well. The first piece of when you step into translating that plan is to really take those environmental factors that you identified before and go, and so what does this mean for us? And again, this is an imperfect exercise, but it's just to fire down your thinking. And what are the actions that we might do? And what you might find is that the actions aren't linear. So what I prefer to do is go down the factors, look at the implications, and then rather look at the actions as an intersection of all. We're systems thinkers, and the world is systems based. So the more you can get away from linear and absolute hierarchical, the better. Sometimes hierarchy counts, but linear really does anymore. Think about the risks, and then think about anything that's really critical to your competitive positioning and your mission of your organisation. And that's just tweaking you to be alert to the most important things. If we can then move to the next slide, please, which is a snapshot. So most businesses, we say, take a 3-year view. There are certain businesses that are slower moving, and you might take a longer term view. But most businesses, we say, a 3-year. And you'll see on the left-hand side, colour-coded. You may not have 5, but we like to colour-code. And why we do that is we actually often, with our clients, build a wall. And you can do that virtually on Miro. It's a great post-it noting exercise. And equally, physically building a wall is even better. And we use both versions. We're running a global session in a couple of weeks, and we'll be doing both, a real room, in-room and online. And so write out your how to wins, crisp statements of how you're going to differentiate, why and what gives us the right to actually call that out. And what will success look like? End FY24, what are the dependencies? What are the big investment chunks, capital investment that we might have to bring into play? And then equally, what are the KPIs? And again, you might find when you list the KPIs out at the back end that they merge and that certain ones are common to all. But get your overall plan. This doesn't have to be detailed. This is just a snapshot view. Again, it'll mean you come back into a better 1 year. If we can now move to the next slide, please. what I'd like you to do is then take each, actually you can go to slide, if you've got a broader organisation with different departments or teams, then get each of those teams and functions to think about what are the most critical initiatives that they are going to bring into play against those different how to wins. And what you might find is that finance has two really essential ones in how to win number one, nothing in two, 1 and 3, and 1 and 4. It really reflects the footprint of effort. And again, the more we can look at the whole, the better you're going to be able to build out a plan and have everyone aligned and connected and still anchored right back to that creating a winning strategy. So if we move to the next slide, please. For each how to win, Team X, or if you're a tiny business, then just do it together, go through each how to win and say, what do we think in this next year? Where do we want to be by end June FY22? What are the big initiatives? What are the key initiatives? And then what are the success outcomes per initiative? And this is where hierarchy does count. You don't want to get too micro. An initiative is a chunk of work. It'll break down into a series of activities and then tasks. And this is now starting to get into the plan. You'll probably build into your 1-year plan key activities and tasks. You may only go to the activity level. The only reason you go lower is to give clarity to the other people who are going to be doing it. And sometimes the last thing they want is a micro broken down thing. So you've got to work out what's the right elevation of definition that you want to go down to without getting too micro. And we find using an online tool, we tend to use a modified version of Monday.com is a really good one. We've tried lots. We've tried Jira, we've tried Trello, we've tried Usana, and we come back to just Monday.com being really versatile in how to capture your plan. Think about what's going to get in the way, or what do you need for execution? What resources, what skills, where are there significant dependencies on external circumstances? And what are the no misses, the things you absolutely got to get right that year? So now you're really building out your plan. You do this against each of your how to wins. Now, the biggest, most significant next step is actually now to put this, to situate it back in your business. If we can move to the next slide, please. All of us know that we're not, all of us know that we equally have a bunch of stuff we have to do, usually by department and function, that you just keep the lights on. So you need to pull that out, and you don't need to get micro with it, but we say each team or group, or if you're a small business as a whole, what are the essential things that we just must do to run our business and get things out to our customers and so forth? And check that that list of activities is, they are still warranted, that there aren't things that you might discard because they're no longer needed. So do challenge yourself there, but it's not a lengthy exercise. The main purpose for doing this is the amount of time it's going to take, because you have to take into account your overall capacity. And when you understand how much time keeping the lights on in your business is already taken, is already consumed, then you know how much capacity you've got to deploy to your how to wins. And so let's assume you go through and you add and you say, gosh, 55% of my time, or 60 or 40 or whatever it might be. No right answer. So that's the first lens. And as I said, you don't need to go into micro here. You might want to put your key milestones for achievement in your plan, depending, or your rhythm. The main thing here is to understand the capacity drag. And then the other thing is are there particular resources who are really demanded? Because we typically have some outstanding resource in the business that we'd love to have 10 of or 4 of or something. And we need to get an understanding of how much in demand they are, and maybe we can get someone else to do the BAU because it would be more valuable to have them available to drive the how to win work. So that's the importance of looking at your BAU. And it is always good just to make note of what priorities. So I've just had a question come through, which is, will you use any information you've learned today in your business within the next 30 days? So that's a great question, because what we do is do a rolling 30, 90 days. And we are highly agile. We recommend organisations are highly agile and iterative, and you don't want to micro plan. So when we look at building out that wall and the initiatives through the year, it's a mud map. And as we learn, it'll iterate and change as we learn. What you do want to be locked on are your measures for the end of that year, your KPIs, so that you know that you are tracking in the right direction. But you might see that you're really exploding in certain area and go, actually, we're going to put more resource there. And so as you learn those different elements, that becomes really critical. So I would, and when we also do the wall map, and when you build out a perhaps an online Miro wall, we actually don't even use 30 days. And the reason we don't lose 30 days is if you don't think out week by week by week, you could miss doing the thing that had to happen in week 2 in order to give you the opportunity to do whatever you needed to do in week 10. And as human beings, we know that if we say 30 days, we'll leave everything to the last sort of 5 or so. And we've seen this particularly in organisations that are dependent on regulatory submissions or whatever. If you don't get certain things done at the beginning of the path, you miss the opportunity and it pushes the whole execution path out. So we would never want you to think in less than 2-week chunks. And we really do urge you to think more in the 1 week. And so when we physically build walls or virtually, we always put a dotted line down the middle of that flip chart for that month and go, what's happening in the first half and what's in the second, and spread it over time. And then we commit that to a Monday agile plan. We focus primarily in on a 90-day, put out other things that you know of, that's well and good, but don't spend too much time on that, and then really go tight on your 30 and have that as a rolling 30 or rolling 45 so you keep that rhythm. And you have to be honest about your performance milestones that you want to hit along the way to know that you're doing well. But that's an answer to your question. The other thing that you might want to chart, which is useful, because sequencing is just king when it comes to execution, is rhythms. So if you have advisory boards, or if some of you have actual boards, or you have external meetings with various stakeholder groups or conferences or whatever it might be, plot the timing of that, because you can then see how your initiatives and activity can actually feed in more usefully. And one of the powers of putting up a physical wall and looking at these sorts of things is you can see the whole in one hit, something that is much harder to do online. And there's nothing quite like looking at a year on a wall, and you can go through and go, well, that's going to need change management. We absolutely going to have a big challenge through the period of October through middle of November. What can we do to mitigate that, etc. So I might stop there again and now throw across to the businesses to reflect on where you're up to and what are your thoughts about next steps. So Johnny, I'll begin again with you, please.
Sure, thank you. So yeah, we've been operating for about 6 or 7 years. As I had talked about, the very beginning of the business was quite tumultuous. We started with an idea, and to do that we needed to change some legislation in Australia. Unfortunately, that process looked to be delayed not long after we'd kind of quit our jobs and began. So we picked up the business and moved to New Zealand and got business set up and licensed in New Zealand before coming back to Australia, and working with the government and the regulators to change the laws and put in place regulations to allow us to do what exactly we intended to do. So it's been a long journey to kind of get to, a period where we're a few years in of being able to operate freely and do exactly what we wanted. So we're now in a position where we have a strong base foundation for growing the business. We've got a team of about 10 that's probably going to scale to something like 20 in the next 6 to 12 months. And we're looking to really drive growth and scale up the business. Just some simple things like the number of companies we raise money for, how much money we're raising, the number of investors on the platform, all those sorts of things, what we're focusing on at the next stage of growth, as well as some new products that are related to our core offering and expanding into Asia. So, we've got a fair bit happening, and 2020 was obviously a significant year, and a lot of the change and things that occurred really required us to sort of take a step back and put some energy into focusing on our strategy and what comes next. We ourselves are also raising capital at the moment, so it's always really important when you're doing that to have a clearly defined strategy and a way of mapping out, where your energies and what the focus of the business and particularly different parts of the business will be going towards as you grow. So this process was valuable. Speaking to Kathryn before talking to her, I sort of quickly put down some notes and some points and some of my initial ideas, and then talking to her and getting her sense and playing back some of those sorts of things, it was really beneficial to then sort of match those up, and there was some good alignment in what I initially thought and then where we discussed and what was put on paper. So, sometimes...
Sorry, can I just ask you a question, Johnny? Can I say, just in the process of, as a business owner, the process of building an annual plan, is there something you could share with the audience of other business owners, that what you learned about creating a plan that might have been different to what you thought going into the process?
Sure. Look, I think Kathryn talked about this doesn't need to necessarily be a big project or something you overbake or you spend oodles and oodles of time on. It's just very beneficial, particularly as startup founders and people who are busy running their own business, to take a step back and put it down and have that clarity and be able to articulate that strategy to your staff. I know personally the way I operate as a manager and a communicator, sometimes it can be hard for my team to know exactly what I mean, or the way I articulate some ideas may not always be particularly clear to everyone. So often, having that North Star or putting down some very key guidelines or strategy and focus that you're going towards can help people maybe draw the link and understand or explain the sort of ineffable or the bits that you don't always sort of put down. So I think it is always very helpful in that regard as a business owner to be able to articulate that and have it that you can refer to.
So for you, it was the process of having a plan on a wall that you could then articulate to your team will make it much easier for you to operationalise over the year.
Definitely, yeah.
Thank you, Johnny. I'm going to come to Marianne next. If you could just share with us a little about your process of going into doing a strategy workshop, and anything you can share that would be useful for other business owners going into this process as well, that you learned that might have been different to what you had thought going into it.
Yeah, I guess first off the bat would be similar to Johnny, where Kathryn actually said at the start, it doesn't have to be a long, arduous, huge documented plan, and something quite simple actually helped us take some of the more complex ideas of our business and refine it down a little bit further. So before going into this, we had ideas of this really helped us more or less crystallize our strategy and get alignment with us as a team and our business. It then gives us a more tangible plan to be able to execute that through our team. And it was more or less, how do we have a simple document that not only when we're communicating it with the team or when we're hiring people and looking at the DNA and our mission and how they align with us, but also for our team to then come back to us and say, hang on a second, this is our plan, this is what we agreed on, so that there's at least shared understanding with everybody in our team in moving forward. And so that as a founder, we don't have that shiny object syndrome where we start to go off track because something looks like an opportunity, but it's actually going to be an obstacle down the track. So this helps us in so many ways in just having that simplicity. It wasn't as complex as I thought it would be, but that doesn't take away from how much goes into it. So that kind of knowledge and experience that Kathryn brought that helped really challenge some of our ideas, but also bring to light some of the things that we intuitively did in our business and didn't really see as a competitive edge because it was second nature to us, and show, well, actually doing it this way and doing it differently is one of your how to win strategies. So
were there any, sorry, can I ask you a question? Were there any particular questions that came up in the process of looking at kind of Kathryn's frameworks and the questions that she put to you that really challenged what you were thinking and might have led to a change in your approach?
I think even just recognising, because ours is very much led from a very personal space and we know the problem quite intimately, leaning into that really helped, and saying, you know, even though there's a lot of logic involved in business in putting plans together, as humans we all make emotional decisions, and so for us acknowledging why we're so passionate about it and why that makes us different and why that then will change who we bring into the team, and just recognising that thing that is important to us is what we should have at the forefront. So just the simple breakdown of looking at how we win and kind of limiting the options there was probably one of the best exercises for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Marianne. And I'll come to you, Stephen. If you could give us an overview of, you went into this strategic process having had a business that's run for a very long time. Is there anything that surprised you of the kind of questions that were asked or the exercises that you did that you think would be helpful to point out to other business owners that they should be thinking about for themselves?
I won't be specific about an actual task or question, but what I would say and what we've learned, because we have been strategizing for, as I say, nearly 20 years, you really need to sit down with a plan, have those tools, the sort of thing that Kathryn's provided, because going through each one of those, even when you think you know it and you've been doing it for years, it's amazing how often you miss something. Or as Marianne said, something you know was there and you've written it down before, but you look at it again and you think, actually, that's more important, or that's a bigger piece of the pie than what we realise. You've really got to have that framework, as I say, as Kathryn's been good enough to provide, to go through it. It kind of pulls out, it teases out quite often some of the things that you miss, and you've got to write things down. I might be saying this because I tend not to do it. You've got to write things down to record them, even, and I'm sure Kathryn won't agree with this, even if you don't look at it till next time, but even when you look at it next time, you think, oh, we meant to do this or that. You've got to write these things down. Don't think you're going to remember them.
Thanks, Steve. Rebecca, if I can just make a couple of observations, because there's a series of questions. Should I leap into responding to those? And I'm going to start with one that's at the bottom. Would it be possible to provide some examples?
Yeah.
It's quite difficult to follow these steps without real examples. This is always a sensitive area because of the market sensitivity. But I think if you look at the series of questions in the Word document, it's quite a logical flow. And just picking up on some of the things that Stephen says, don't do this in over days and days and days. Sit down and have someone ask those questions of you and record your response. And you will iterate, because we go to an interview and we always walk out going, oh, dash, I wish I'd said that, or that wasn't really what I meant, because that's the way our neurology works. We set up, so we want to build and put that to work. And the reason why we do all of those questions, and there are probably a couple I would add in, what are your values? And equally, what are blockers and enablers? And I may send Rebecca an updated version and you can reach out. But going through all of them gives you a sense of your business at a moment in time and how clear you are. So that's the way I would do that. Now, often what happens is people do mission, vision, values, plan. And they might go, oh, what differentiates us? Oh, these few things differentiate us. And so I know it's not really answering the question that's there, because it's, let me try and think, because a lot of the organisations' case studies are all big and I just don't like sharing data. But I will use Stephen's example, actually, because he highlighted superbly the mission of his business, that they were there to really serve the needs, starting with students and then the artist community, and a serious artist community, and that's continued to evolve. And then, and so that the where progressed. And why did the where progress? Because he was looking out in the environment, they saw new needs, new opportunities popping up, a la a SWOT would show, and they would be strengthening, growing their strengths and capabilities, and then they would see another opportunity of where to play. Oh gosh, there's no one else doing that. So if you think of the questions, he did the mission work, probably kept looking at the environment and going, gosh, there's still not much in the school space. But then Stephen's business moved to other sectors when the Chinese moved into the market and started to supply the school market. So there's an adjustment. And equally, when you go to the where to play, Stephen began Stephen's dad began in Australia, and they're absolutely the market leaders. And so even though they're doing great things here, it's kind of a contained size. They can grow the market, but there'll be limits to that. So now where else? So they're up to that stage of how can we now expand? And they're also doing that with new uses as well. And Stephen raised some things. We're looking and we're seeing the rise of the Sunday painter. So there's another market. So you start to see these things emerge. It's a very iterative thing. Now, I highlighted not all of what Stephen's business competes on, because that wouldn't be right. But right from the get-go, they had to become innovators and do great R&D. And they couldn't do it in a little bubble on their own. They had to reach out to artists. So they built relationships. So therefore their credibility and so forth. And their reputation around being sustainable. Those are things they did, and they've continued to develop those how-to-wins. In the conversation with Stephen, as we looked at what next, we highlighted another couple of things that he now is in a position to do with his business because of where he's positioned today. And then you can clearly see the competencies that Stephen would never let go, and that's his R&D and his innovation. And I asked him, how do you know how well the business is going? And one of the things I'm sure he won't mind me sharing is, where do you need to pay attention in your business? And he said, how much time we spend in that R&D lab. And so that's a capability that they continue to build, but it's also something that he put down to consider as a priority for the plan. So making sure that enough time, space for the team to continue to develop would go into his plan this year. And so that's the way it plays out. Does that help that person?
Sure. Thank you, Kathryn. There's just a couple of technical questions that have come through that I want to address now. There's also just questions for, a number of the people in the audience today will be business owners that are now going to go and run a strategy session on their own or with their team. So there's a couple of questions about how to do that. One of them comes from Alex, and he's asking, what's the optimal number of people in a strategy meeting?
Yeah, so a couple of answers there. If you are quite a small, tight-knit entrepreneurial business, then you can actually have everyone there. But the owners have a certain, if it's privately owned, the owners always have decision rights. So I'd always get the owners together first, so that you've thought this through on your own and you're not thrown in without having done the thinking yourself. So it's actually the ownership structure counts somewhat. And you don't want to go in as a group of leaders absolutely unclear about everything. Otherwise, you won't get through stuff well. You want to think through. So our process, we actually interview ahead of time, and we don't actually do that to get the data only. We do it to tweak the neurology so that people's brains are working on these areas. So when you do come into room, you are far more ready to actually have the conversation, because your brain has been clicking away whether you're conscious or not. The sessions we run range from probably 1 or 2 right through to hundreds. And so you've got to set the process up though. So a classical one, I would bring your leadership team together in the first instance. I'd probably, if you're a small enough business, get inputs and thoughts about some of those questions with your broader team before you come in. So you've actually opened the door to ownership and you've said, we care about what you think. And so that's a really important piece. So don't think of it about a session. Think of it as a process. Think about how do we connect? How do we set up for the best conversations? And then how do we set up to engage and get feedback? Also be clear about where you're not going to change your mind, because you're not going to flip-flop around core purpose and visions and things and probably some measures once you've set those. So be clear when you're actually asking for input and where you're actually engaging to internalise and help people understand. So those are some pointers. There's not a fixed number. I mean, we just have a whole range of people, but thinking about the purpose and how you set it up for the best conversations is the right way. We don't do PowerPoint slides, by the way, in our presentations. We won't let people, unless there's some very particular thing that can only be shown on the slide. They come to have a conversation, generative dialogue.
So what actually happens in the room on the day? If you can just give us in a couple of seconds.
So we always start with the leader and then we give a download of that feedback anonymised. So a very fast stream of consciousness themed piece, because that's all about pattern reading. And it's not up for debate. It's actually how it was when we did those interviews.
What's in that stream of consciousness, if you don't mind me asking, just on behalf of people?
Yes, certainly. Stream of consciousness, no. Stream of consciousness is just almost like you would read a story fast. So you're not sitting there punctuating. We never use a PowerPoint deck to summarise the feedback. Why? Because we don't want people to fixate on the word. And we use the words of the team. Again, as I say, anonymised against the questions we asked. And that already creates a richness. It creates a trust. And it gets issues, tough issues and exciting issues out on the table in a very neutral way. So that's always right up front. We allow the team to engage and add to that, but not debate it. We work pretty fast. We then do the external environment, just as done in the room. We would then check, on the list at least, we then check in about our broad strategy. Now, if you haven't got one, this is where you go, right, why are we here? How did we start this business? And what is our big goal of impact on the globe or in Australia or wherever? So we use those questions to shape the agenda. For a business that's got the bones all there, then we start with looking at the environment and testing the strength of our competitive positioning in that environment and what might we need to tweak and change. And then we usually go to a picture of success in the time horizon that we are working with. So, as I said, we stimulate it with some thinking and we break it into small groups, usually about 5 or 6 if you've got that many. The main thing when you do pictures of success is you've got enough know-how in the group to have a decent conversation. We don't want guff on guff, we want enough richness. If there isn't enough people to break it into groups that can have a rich conversation, then do it together. But we would always stand around a flip chart. So you're into co-creation, creative mode there.
So at the end of the day then, for people who are running this themselves, what should they have?
What they should have, off the back of that picture of success, 3 years out, where will we be? What success look like on as many dimensions as you like? Come back to 1 year, and then we say, right, what are the strategic pillars or the how to win strategies, the chunks that we're going to go after? And then, so you will have, these are the 4 or 5. Some of them maybe carry forwards, so you've got those. And then equally we would go, right, in those first, initial thoughts, what do we think are going to be the big things that we'll do this year, the big initiatives? And map those out on the wall. And we always colour code them. If you've got 3, then 4 different colours of Post-it notes, and do your wall with flip chart paper, dotted line down the middle, and then stage them over time. And then you can step back and go, oh gosh, we're not going to be able to do that. Well, that needs to happen before that. It's a very tactile, powerful way. It's multimodality.
Okay, so just to clarify, so you've got your year goal, what you're going to achieve in the year, and then you're breaking it down into your initiatives that you're going to do for the year, and then you're placing the initiatives into months. And then
you're placing it into months. And then when we look at the whole thing, Rebecca, we go, okay, now we're going to look at what might support or get in the way of execution. So we would get a different coloured Post-it note and look at what are the risks, what are the capabilities, skill gaps, where haven't we got capacity, where are we going to need investment, where do we need change management, etc. And we put those Post-it notes along the plan, and that allows us to see where we might need to build risk mitigation or do something differently or create a change management approach or whatever. And you can equally put along the line your board meetings, when you do your budgeting, etc., etc.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Kathryn. I've run businesses for many years and I've never known how you're supposed to do an annual plan and never had the money to be able to pay for a consultant to come in. So that is a really useful framework that you've given us so that as business owners, we're able to do our own framework. I want to wrap up. We are a little over time, but thank you for all that amazing content. Thank you, Kathryn, and thank you to all our case studies, Johnny, Marianne, and Stephen. We have shared links to your businesses. Please do check them out. And I hope you also got something out of the process of working with Kathryn over the past couple of weeks. I just want to do a couple of quick reminders before we go. So this event is part of a series. There will be events over the next 5 weeks. The next event next week is going to be incredible with Ben Thompson, the founder CEO of Employment Hero, on how to operate for growth. So now you've got your strategic plan for the year. How do you make sure that it happens? How do you motivate a team? We're also going to look at how do you motivate people who are working remotely, which is a new challenge, well, a bigger challenge now than it was a few years ago. So please register for that event. We will share another link to the to register for tickets. The event after that will also be a great one. That is capital raising in 2021. So if you are a business that is thinking about raising capital, that is a session for you to meet the investors. So we have Rick Baker, who is one of the founding partners of Blackbird VC, and we also have Kylie Fraser, who is from Eleanor VC. So that'll be an opportunity for you to learn all about capital raising. We'll share the link to that event now as well. If you would like to be a case study in any of these events, if you would like to be able to ask questions directly of any of the panelists, any of the experts, please email citybusiness@City of Sydney. We are going to put that email address that you need to email up in the chat now as well. I really hope that you enjoyed the webinar today. There's a poll that we have put up which showed that I think 88% of people have got something out of it that they are going to take and use in their business in the next 30 days. Please do check out the other events. Thank you again. I'm Rebecca Campbell and I hope to see you next week.